On January 23, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The media celebrated it. Pro-crypto policy, American innovation, leadership in digital assets. Finally, a government that understands Bitcoin. The price spiked. Crypto Twitter went crazy. Everyone called it bullish. Everyone except the people who actually read the order. Because if you read the language, if you study the legal framework, if you understand what strategic reserves actually mean in government policy, you realize this isn't what they're telling you. This isn't pro-crypto. This is the setup for something else entirely. Something that happened before. In 1933, when the government used almost identical language to confiscate gold from American citizens, revalue it, and erase 40% of the national debt overnight. They called that one a strategic national asset, too. They said it was essential to economic stability, too. They gave the Treasury authority to acquire and hold, too. And then they made it illegal to own gold for 41 years. Executive Order 6102, the greatest wealth confiscation in American history, exposed only after it was too late for anyone to do anything about it. I'm going to show you exactly what Trump's Bitcoin executive order actually says. Line by line, the specific language that mirrors 1933, the legal authorities it grants that the media isn't talking about, the framework it creates for mandatory acquisition, and most importantly, the timeline for what comes next. Because this order isn't the end, it's the beginning. The first step in a multi-phase strategy to position the government to confiscate and revalue Bitcoin exactly the way Roosevelt confiscated and revalued gold. And when they execute that strategy, when they announce the official price, when they make compliance mandatory, you'll either be positioned correctly or you'll lose everything. This video will show you which side you need to be on. Let me start with what the executive order actually says, because most people haven't read it. They've read headlines, they've read tweets, they've read summaries from crypto influencers who are excited about number going up. But the actual language tells a different story. The order is titled, Strengthening American Leadership in Digital Financial Technology. Sounds positive. Sounds like innovation and competitiveness. But titles are marketing. The substance is in the details. Section 1 establishes policy. It states that the United States government will position itself as a leader in digital asset markets. It declares digital assets vital to American economic security. It establishes that the federal government will acquire, hold, and manage digital assets as strategic reserves. Read that again. The federal government will acquire digital assets as strategic reserves. This isn't about letting you own Bitcoin. This is about the government owning Bitcoin, acquiring it, building a reserve, and managing it the way they manage the Strategic Petroleum Reserve or gold reserves in Fort Knox. Section 2 grants authority. It directs the Treasury Department to develop frameworks for digital asset acquisition. It authorizes the Treasury to hold Bitcoin and other digital assets on behalf of the United States. It directs the creation of custody solutions, valuation methodologies, and accounting standards for government-held digital assets. This is infrastructure. They're building the machinery to hold massive amounts of Bitcoin at government scale. You don't build this infrastructure for a small symbolic position. You build it when you're planning to acquire billions or trillions of dollars worth. And most critically, Section 3 addresses acquisition methods. The order authorizes acquisition through multiple channels, seizure from criminal enterprises, which they're already doing. They hold over 210,000 Bitcoin from Silk Road, Bitfinex, and other seizures. Acceptance as payment for fines, penalties, and settlements. This is new. Government agencies can now accept Bitcoin as payment and retain it for the reserve, and purchase through market operations or strategic transactions. That means buying. But here's what the order doesn't say. It doesn't set limits. It doesn't cap how much they can acquire. Now, let me show you why this language matters. By comparing it to Executive Order 6102 from 1933. Roosevelt's order was titled Forbidding the Hoarding of Gold Coin, Gold Bullion, and Gold Certificates. Different title. But the substance was remarkably similar. That order declared gold a strategic asset essential to national economic stability. Trump's order declares Bitcoin a strategic asset vital to national security. Same framing. That order granted the Treasury authority to acquire and hold gold on behalf of the United States. Trump's order grants the Treasury authority to acquire and hold digital assets on behalf of the United States. Same authority. That order required delivery of gold to Federal Reserve banks. Trump's order doesn't require delivery yet, but it creates the legal framework for mandatory acquisition later. That order established penalties for noncompliance. 10 years in prison, $10,000 fine. Trump's order doesn't establish penalties yet, but the authority exists to add them through subsequent regulation or legislation. The pattern is identical. Declare the asset strategic. Grant acquisition authority. Build the infrastructure. Then make it mandatory. Roosevelt did steps 1 through 3 in 1933. Step 4 came in 1934 with the Gold Reserve Act. Trump just did steps 1 through 3. Step 4 is coming. It's 1 through 3. Step 4 is coming. Now let me address the obvious question. Why would the government want to confiscate Bitcoin? The same reason they confiscated gold, to revalue it and erase debt. The United States government owes $37 trillion. The debt-to-GDP ratio is 132%. Annual interest payments are $1.2 trillion and rising. By 2027, interest will consume over $2 trillion annually if rates stay elevated. This debt cannot be repaid through normal means. You cannot tax enough. You cannot cut spending enough. You cannot grow fast enough. The math doesn't work. There is only one historical solution that works. Currency devaluation through asset revaluation. Here's how it worked in 1933. The government confiscated gold at $20.67 per ounce. Then they revalued it to $35, a 69% increase. This accomplished two things. First, it created value on the government's balance sheet. Their gold reserves went from $4 billion to $6.8 billion overnight. Second, it devalued the dollar relative to gold, which inflated away the real value of dollar-denominated debt. The government owed the same nominal amount, but paid in dollars, worth 40% less. They erased 40% of the debt burden through accounting manipulation and currency debasement, and they did it legally because they controlled the gold and set the price. Now apply this to Bitcoin. The government acquires 1 million Bitcoin over the next 3 years. That's the target in Senator Cynthia Lummis's Bitcoin Act, which aligns with the executive order. At current prices around $100,000, 1 million Bitcoin costs $100 billion, but they won't pay market price. They'll acquire through seizures, which cost nothing, through fines and settlements, which generate revenue, through below-market mandatory sales if they implement confiscation. Let's say their average cost is $60,000 per Bitcoin. That's $60 billion total investment. Now they hold 1 million Bitcoin. Then they revalue. They announce that for purposes of the U.S. balance sheet, Bitcoin is valued at $1 million per coin. Why 1 million? Because that's the number that makes the math work. At 1 million per coin, 1 million Bitcoin equals $1 trillion in assets. Combined with gold revaluation, which they'll likely do simultaneously, the government suddenly has 5 to 7 trillion in hard asset value on the balance sheet. Assets that offset debt. Assets that back the dollar. This is marketed as returning to sound money. Finally, fiscal responsibility. The dollar backed by Bitcoin and gold, hard assets. The gold bugs love it. The Bitcoin maximalists love it. Everyone celebrates. Except here's what actually happens. When the government revalues Bitcoin to $1 million, the market follows. If the largest holder in the world says Bitcoin is worth 1 million, the market reprices. Bitcoin goes from 100,000 to 300,000 to 500,000 to 800,000 over 12 to 18 months. And as Bitcoin rises tenfold, what happens to the dollar? It collapses. Because if Bitcoin goes from 100,000 to 1 million, that's not Bitcoin going up. That's the dollar going down. 90% down. A 90% collapse in the dollar's purchasing power shows up everywhere. Food prices multiply by 5. Energy prices multiply by 5. Housing costs explode. Everything denominated in dollars becomes worth 90% less in real terms, including government debt. The 37 trillion in debt is still 37 trillion nominally, but in real terms, adjusted for the devaluation, it's worth 3.7 trillion. They erased 90% of the debt burden, not by paying it, by devaluing the currency it's denominated in. This is the plan. This is what the executive order enables, and almost nobody understands it because they're too busy celebrating that the government is pro-Bitcoin. Now let me show you the specific mechanisms in the executive order that make this possible. First, the order establishes a working group on digital asset markets. This group includes the Treasury Secretary, the Commerce Secretary, the Attorney General, and the heads of multiple other agencies. This is not a study group, this is an implementation group. And when you bring together Treasury, Justice, and Commerce, you're building cross-agency coordination for major policy execution. Treasury handles acquisition and custody. Justice handles seizure and enforcement. Commerce handles market impact and industry coordination. This is the bureaucratic machinery for a massive operation. Second, the order directs the creation of valuation methodologies. This sounds technical and boring. It's actually critical. Right now, Bitcoin is valued at market price, whatever buyers and sellers agree to on exchanges. But the order establishes government authority to create official valuation methodologies. This means the government can declare an official price separate from market price, just like they did with gold. In 1933, the market price for gold was higher than the official price of $20.67. But the government paid the official price for confiscation. Then they raised the official price to $35. The market eventually followed because the government was the dominant holder and price setter. The same framework is being established for Bitcoin. Official valuation methodology means official price, which means the government pays you one price and revalues to another. Third, the order addresses custody solutions at government scale. This might seem like administrative detail. It's actually the clearest signal of intent. You don't build Fort Knox if you're planning to hold a few gold coins. You build Fort Knox when you're planning to hold 8,000 tons. The order directs creation of custody solutions for digital assets at strategic reserve scale, multi-billion-dollar custody, institutional-grade security, government-controlled wallets that hold the nation's Bitcoin the way vaults hold the nation's gold. This infrastructure takes 12 to 18 months to build properly. The order was signed in January 2025. The infrastructure will be ready by mid-2026. That's when Phase 2 begins. Fourth, the order explicitly protects current holdings. This is the part crypto enthusiasts celebrate. The order states that lawful holders of digital assets have the right to self-custody and use of their assets free from government overreach. Sounds great, but read the language carefully. Lawful holders. What makes a holder lawful or unlawful? Right now, everyone is lawful, but if future regulation requires registration, reporting, or licensing to hold Bitcoin above a certain threshold, suddenly you're unlawful if you don't comply. And unlawful holders don't have rights protected by the executive order. This is how they'll implement mandatory sale. You'll have the right to hold Bitcoin as long as you comply with all requirements. But the requirements will become onerous: registration, reporting, taxation, capital gains on unrealized gains, eventually mandatory licensing to hold above 10 Bitcoin, then above 1 Bitcoin. Non-compliance makes you unlawful. Unlawful means seizure. It's elegant. You still technically have the right to hold Bitcoin, you just can't meet the requirements to exercise that right. Now let me show you the timeline, because understanding the phases tells you when to act. Phase 1 is 2025. Legal framework and narrative building. This is now. The executive order establishes authority. The working group develops implementation plans. Treasury builds custody infrastructure. Justice identifies seizure opportunities. The narrative is positive, pro-innovation. American leadership. Number go up. This is when most people are fooled. They see positive headlines and assume positive intent. They don't read the order. They don't understand the machinery being built. They celebrate while the trap is being constructed around them. Phase 2 is 2026, quiet accumulation and regulatory pressure. The government begins acquiring Bitcoin at scale, but doesn't announce totals. They seize more from criminal enterprises. They accept more as payment for fines. They buy through intermediaries and OTC desks to avoid spiking the market price. At the same time, regulations tighten. Exchanges face new reporting requirements. Tax treatment becomes more aggressive. Self-custody becomes more complicated through compliance rules. The message is subtle but clear. It's easier to sell your Bitcoin than to hold it. The people who don't have strong conviction sell. They take profits. They avoid the regulatory hassle. The government acquires their coins at market prices. Smart retail is squeezed out before Phase 3. Phase 3 is 2027, crisis and mandatory action. A triggering event creates justification for emergency measures. Maybe a debt ceiling crisis. Maybe a major bank failure. Maybe a dollar crisis, as foreign holders dump treasuries. Whatever the trigger, the response is the same: emergency authority to stabilize the financial system. Part of that stabilization is mandatory sale of Bitcoin above a certain threshold to the Treasury at the official price. The official price will be below market, maybe 80,000 per Bitcoin when the market is at 150,000. You're forced to sell at a 47% discount. Penalties for noncompliance are severe: criminal prosecution, asset forfeiture, prison. Most people comply because they're in government databases from exchange KYC and IRS reporting. The government knows what you own. They send you a letter. You have 30 days. You comply or face prosecution. After mandatory sale, after the government holds 1 million Bitcoin or more, comes Phase 4, revaluation. The official price is raised from 80,000 to 1 million. The government's Bitcoin position goes from 80 billion to 1 trillion. Their gold is simultaneously revalued from $42 per ounce to 20,000. Total hard asset backing jumps to 5 to 7 trillion. The dollar is declared backed by Bitcoin and gold. Markets reprice. Inflation explodes. Dollar collapses. Debt is erased. Wealth is transferred from citizens who held dollars and sold Bitcoin at the official price to the government that holds Bitcoin at the revalued price. Exactly like 1933. Let me show you who wins and who loses so you understand the stakes. Winners. The government. They erase 20 to 30 trillion in real debt burden through devaluation. Politicians who avoid the impossible choice between cutting spending and raising taxes, they just devalue instead. Early holders who don't comply with confiscation. If you hold Bitcoin through self-custody that the government doesn't know about and you don't sell at the official price, You ride the revaluation from 100,000 to 1 million. Tenfold increase while everyone else loses. Wealthy insiders who see this coming in position in hard assets. Real estate, gold, Bitcoin, commodities. They preserve wealth through the devaluation. International holders in jurisdictions that don't confiscate. If you're a citizen of Singapore or Switzerland holding Bitcoin in local custody, American confiscation orders don't apply. You keep your Bitcoin and ride the revaluation. Losers. Anyone who complied with confiscation. You sold at 80,000 and watched it go to 1 million. You lost 92% of potential value. Plus your dollars are now worth 90% less from inflation. You're destroyed. Anyone holding cash or bonds, dollar devaluation destroys purchasing power. Bonds are repaid in worthless dollars. Your 100,000 in savings buys what 10,000 bought before. Retirees on fixed income. Social Security is denominated in dollars. It'll be adjusted for inflation, but always behind real price increases. Real purchasing power falls 50 to 70%. Middle-class workers. Wages don't keep pace with inflation. Your salary doubles nominally, but prices quintuple. Your standard of living collapses. Anyone with dollar-denominated debt at variable rates. Mortgage rates spike as the dollar crisis unfolds. Adjustable rate mortgages become unpayable. Foreclosures surge. This is the wealth transfer from the middle class to the government, from savers to debtors, from compliant citizens to non-compliant holders and wealthy insiders. It's the same transfer that happened in 1933, just larger because the debt is larger and the devaluation will be more extreme. Now let me show you how to protect yourself, because there are strategies that position you on the winning side, but you have to execute now while options exist. First, self-custody. Get your Bitcoin off exchanges immediately. If it's on Coinbase, Kraken, Gemini, any centralized exchange, it's in a government database. They know you have it. They can freeze it. They can force the exchange to sell it to the Treasury on your behalf. But if you hold in self-custody, in a hardware wallet you control, they can only send you a confiscation letter. They can't automatically seize. And if you claim it's lost, if you say you forgot the password or the hardware wallet was damaged, proving you still have it is difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. Move to self-custody now. Second, minimize KYC exposure for future acquisitions. Every Bitcoin you buy through an exchange goes in a database. Every single one. Consider alternatives for future purchases. Peer-to-peer platforms where you buy from individuals. Bitcoin ATMs with low limits that don't require ID. Mining if you have cheap electricity. These methods don't create the database entries that enable targeted confiscation letters. Third, jurisdiction diversification. The United States can confiscate assets held by U.S. citizens and assets held within U.S. jurisdiction. But assets held by non-U.S. entities in non-U.S. jurisdictions are much harder to reach. Consider establishing legal structures in favorable jurisdictions. Singapore, Switzerland, Panama, Portugal. Companies or trusts that hold assets. This is complex and requires professional legal and tax advice. But wealthy families have used international structures to protect assets from overreaching governments for centuries. This is that moment. Fourth, diversify into other hard assets. Don't put everything in Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is specifically targeted for confiscation, you want assets that aren't. Gold stored privately outside the banking system. Productive real estate that generates income, commodities, energy assets, businesses that produce cash flow regardless of currency. The goal is to be outside the dollar system across multiple asset classes. If one gets targeted, others survive. Fifth, understand the game theory of compliance. In 1933, most Americans complied with gold confiscation. They were scared of prosecution, but actual prosecutions were rare. The government relied on voluntary compliance because they couldn't prosecute everyone. The same will be true for Bitcoin. They'll threaten severe penalties. They'll make examples of a few high-profile cases. But prosecuting millions of people for not selling their Bitcoin is impractical. They need voluntary compliance, which means the real risk of non-compliance is lower than the threatened risk. I'm not telling you to break the law. I'm telling you to understand the enforcement reality. Assess your personal risk tolerance. Decide before the confiscation order how you'll respond. Don't make that decision in the panic of the moment. Sixth, watch the signals. The government won't announce confiscation out of nowhere. There will be warning signs in the 12 to 18 months before, increased regulatory pressure on exchanges, new reporting requirements, proposals for unrealized capital gains taxes on crypto, official statements about financial stability concerns, restrictions on self-custody. When you see these signals accelerating, that's when you take final protective action. Move remaining assets off exchanges, finalize international structures, convert some Bitcoin to other hard assets. The timeline I've outlined puts confiscation in 2027, but watch the signals. It could be sooner or later depending on how quickly the debt crisis unfolds. Now let me address the objections because I know what you're thinking. First objection. Trump is pro-Bitcoin. He spoke at Bitcoin conferences. He's not going to confiscate. Roosevelt was pro-sound money too. He campaigned on returning to fiscal responsibility. Then he confiscated gold because the debt crisis left no other option. Politicians say what gets them elected. They do what the situation requires. Trump may genuinely like Bitcoin. But when the debt crisis peaks, when interest payments hit $2 trillion, when the government faces default or devaluation, liking Bitcoin won't matter. Survival will matter. And confiscation enables survival. Second objection, Bitcoin is decentralized. They can't confiscate it like gold. Bitcoin's protocol is decentralized. Ownership in America is not. Coinbase has your information. Kraken has your information. The IRS has your information. Every exchange that required identity verification reported you. They know what you own. They know when you bought it. They know your cost basis. Decentralization protects the network from shutdown. It doesn't protect you from a confiscation letter with your name and holdings on it. Third objection. There would be massive political backlash. Crypto holders would revolt. There was backlash against gold confiscation. It happened anyway. There was backlash against money printing in 2020. It happened anyway. There was backlash against bank bailouts in 2008. They happened anyway. When governments face existential fiscal crisis, they do what's necessary and manage the backlash later. By the time the backlash materializes, your Bitcoin is already confiscated and revalued. You can vote them out in the next election, but you can't get your Bitcoin back. Fourth objection, this is conspiracy theory. There's no evidence this is the plan. The evidence is the executive order itself, the language creating strategic reserve authority, the framework for official valuation, the machinery for government scale custody, the parallel to 1933. This isn't conspiracy, it's pattern recognition. Governments facing debt crisis use the same playbook because it works. Confiscate hard assets, revalue them, debase the currency, erase debt. It worked for Roosevelt. It'll work for whoever's in office when the debt crisis peaks. Let me be clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I'm not saying Bitcoin will be confiscated tomorrow. I'm not saying this is guaranteed to happen. I'm saying the legal framework is being built. The infrastructure is being created. The historical parallel is exact, and the fiscal math makes it likely. Could the government find another solution? Could they actually cut spending or reform entitlements or grow out of the debt? Theoretically, yes. Realistically, no. Those solutions require political courage and long-term thinking. Confiscation requires only a crisis and an executive order. One of these is easy, one is nearly impossible. Which do you think they'll choose? I'm also not saying you should sell all your Bitcoin. I'm saying you should hold it in ways that protect you from confiscation, self-custody, international diversification, multiple hard asset classes. If confiscation doesn't happen, you still have your Bitcoin. If it does happen, you're positioned to survive. Here's the bottom line. Trump's Bitcoin executive order is not what the media says it is. It's not pro-crypto innovation. It's not American leadership. It's the legal framework for strategic acquisition, official valuation, and potential confiscation. The same framework Roosevelt used in 1933. The language is almost identical. The fiscal situation is worse. The mechanism will be the same. Confiscate at official price, revalue higher, debase the dollar, erase debt, transfer wealth from citizens to government. The only question is whether you'll be positioned correctly when it happens. The executive order is signed. The working group is active. The infrastructure is being built. The timeline is 2025 to 2027. You have 18 to 36 months. That's not a lot of time to restructure how you hold assets, to move to self-custody, to establish international structures, to diversify into other hard assets, to prepare psychologically for what's coming. Start now. Read the executive order yourself. Verify what I'm telling you, then take action based on what you see, not what crypto influencers tell you to see. Because when the confiscation letters go out, when the official price is announced, when compliance becomes mandatory, it'll be too late. Your assets will be frozen. Your options will be gone. You'll comply to or face prosecution. The people who win are the people who saw it coming and positioned in advance. The people who lose are the people who celebrated the executive order without reading it. If this video changed how you see Trump's Bitcoin executive order, if you understand now that pro-crypto framing can hide confiscation infrastructure, then you're starting to see how government policy actually works. Not the marketing, not the headlines, the legal mechanics. Subscribe because over the next 18 months, I'll track every signal, every regulatory change, every working group announcement, every step toward mandatory acquisition. You'll see the pattern unfold in real time, and you'll know exactly when the window for protective action is closing. This is not financial advice. This is pattern recognition. The pattern from 1933 is repeating in 2025. The language is the same. The authority is the same. The outcome will be the same. Position yourself now while you still can. The executive order is signed. The clock is running. The choice is yours.